All right, hey folks. So today's video is going to be talking about health and the choices that we make about that and what we can do to make the best choices for us. So firstly, thanks for making it onto my channel. If you have any questions or comments, pop them down below. And if you'd like to work with me on your own strength, fat loss, physique, whatever goals, then there's a link in the description. Now, before I even say anything, I want to show you something. Check this out. This is from a study called Visceral and Ectopic Fat, Atherosclerosis and Cardiometabolic Disease, a Position Statement. So you've got two gentlemen here. The guy on the left, he's a 67-year-old male with a regular normal BMI, right? And the guy on the right-hand side, he's a little bit younger. I think he's 53 years old, and he's got obesity. So he's essentially a 30 BMI. However, what do you guys notice? Now, for the more astute amongst you, you probably notice two things. Firstly, the guy on the right is jacked. Look at the quads on him, right? The guy on the right has got quads, he's got pecs, he's got shoulders. I mean, barely, what you can make out. This is an MRI scan. The guy on the left looks like a DL, like he doesn't even lift. He's got no quads whatsoever, no quad flare there at all, no guns, nothing, So there's big differences in the physique. That's the first one. What else can you notice? If you look at the guy on the left, the red spots signify visceral fat deposits. Look at the right, he has far less. So two things immediately spring to mind. Firstly, the guy on the right is yoked, right? And the guy on the left has got far more visceral fat. Now, which one of these do you think is going to be more unhealthy? Well, at the moment, the jury is still out in the open because it's not clear. The guy on the left has got a normal BMI. So he's BMI 25, basically roughly kind of where I'm at now, about BMI 25. The guy on the right, his BMI is 30, so he's a lot heavier. But that doesn't always tell the full story. Plus, you know what, guys? Life happens. Yeah, it would be nice that if we were all just low BMI, healthy individuals. But it is what it is. We have individual differences. We make our choices. We have genetic predetermined, leanings towards different body weights, let's say. I won't say predetermined weights because that's a little bit too definite, but we have leanings towards being heavier or being lighter. Everyone does, right? What they naturally kind of go with if they just let go of everything. So you look at the guy on the left. Now, he would appear to be all right in terms of BMI. If he was dressed up in a suit, he'd probably be all right, but he clearly doesn't train. Also, he clearly doesn't really take care of his health, because with that much visceral fat deposit, more than likely, he probably consumes quite a lot of food, maybe quite a lot of alcohol, stuff like that. Probably doesn't take care of himself. So that's why he's got such high levels of ectopic and visceral fat. The guy on the right, for example, is clearly a lifter. So he's heavier than normal, sure. Maybe that's more strain on his heart, sure. But the amount of visceral fat he's got in his body is very, very minimal. So the position statement for the conclusion of this paper is, although the link between BMI and morbidity and mortality risk is firmly established at the population level, considerable variation exists at the individual level in the cardiometabolic risk profile in people with the same BMI. What that's basically saying is that while there is a definite link on average with higher BMIs to metabolic disease, etc., however, there is also considerable variation for those with higher BMIs and lower BMIs in terms of how at risk they are. Now, I don't know for certain, but I'd be willing to bet the guy on the right is far less at risk, certainly from visceral fat-induced diseases. I mean, no doubt he is, because he's got hardly any, whereas the guy on the left is definitely going to be at risk. So let's have a look before we move on and look at the dangers of visceral and ectopic fat. So this is a quote from a paper. This body composition phenotype is associated with medical disorders such as metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, and several malignancies, including prostate, breast, and colorectal cancers. That is essentially the position statement of excess amounts of visceral and ectopic fat. So we can say this person has excess visceral fat, right? And there's also a list of varying things here from another study which discusses the potential problems of visceral fat above and beyond regular fat levels. So the ideal situation, as I keep saying, is we should all be at a reasonable BMI with low levels of visceral fat. However, the choices we make don't always align with our health. So thinking about this from a realistic standpoint, what can we at least do to reduce some of the worst dangers, which is visceral fat? And you can see from the list here, I mean, this is just a horrendous list: hypertension, cardiovascular disease, heart failure, coronary heart disease, arrhythmias, respiratory diseases, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, brain health, reduced brain size, reduced cognitive function, dementia, cancers, various other things, okay? So, one more thing, in terms of how we can actually fix this. So let's now we've established that BMI can vary massively in terms of health, okay? In general, higher BMIs are not associated with good outcomes. Okay, so let's not go off the deep end on that. But within individuals, there can be a high degree of variances. So you've got a guy who's pretty jacked with lower levels of visceral fat. Now, that might be an overall higher strain on the heart. However, as long as he's, taking care of himself and his visceral fat is low, he's probably not going to be as much at risk as a guy with same weight and higher levels of visceral fat. So this study looked at how we can actually reduce visceral fat. And the two main mechanisms which work almost equally as well is diet and exercise. So as is usual with science, they like to break things down. But basically this said, look, we compared control group with a group which did most of their weight loss through diet and a group which did most of their weight loss through exercise. And we found there was pretty much the same result. Exercise-induced weight loss caused a little bit more overall subcutaneous and visceral fat, but in general, they were about the same, and they were a lot more than just a control group, okay? So, yeah, and there was also a group which exercised without any weight loss, and even they lost some subcutaneous and visceral fat. So they obviously recomped. They gained some muscle, they dropped some body fat, which is great, So regardless of weight loss, even just exercise alone is going to cause visceral fat loss, is going to cause subcutaneous fat loss via recomposition type of mechanic. Obviously, the ideal situation is if you're at risk, you lose weight and you diet and exercise and you drop a load of weight and whatever else, you get better outcomes. But life happens, and if your weight loss hasn't been going that well, at least you should be training like a beast in the gym to reduce visceral fat deposits. And one of the things that I recommend for a lot of my clients is to do a long recomposition phase where they just recomposition and they're slowly getting stronger. And as long as they're getting stronger, their body fat is going to be going down because they have replaced it with muscle. And I will be doing a piece on that, on a very impressive natural transformation, which was the result of a lot of recompositioning, in a future video. Anyway, so one last example of this is, this was some CT arm scans of 3 57-year-old males. And again, we're talking about making choices today, right? This is from a book by Wilmore and Castile, 2004. And what we see here is a greater degree of intramuscular and subcutaneous fat deposits in sedentary individuals. So if you look at the sedentary individual there, you look at the muscle, you look at the fat, far more fat, right? Far less muscle. Swimmer, a little bit better. Bodybuilder, a lot better. And clearly, the bodybuilder's muscle is far leaner as well, with less intramuscular triglycerides in that muscle, because you can see it's all striated. Yeah. Whereas with the sedentary individual, he's got actual fat deposits in his muscle, which makes his muscle more marbled, like you would with a fatty steak. So either way, resistance training helps. Now, what are the implications? The implications are this. Well, quite simple. Firstly, diet and exercise helps. But secondly, right, and this is the important thing, how do we know we're actually working out hard enough? Because diet's quite easy. How do you know if you're in a fat loss phase, how do you know you're dieting hard enough? Well, you lost weight, right? So let's say you've been on a diet for 4 weeks, you've lost absolutely zero. Well, you clearly weren't dieting hard enough, right? Whatever happened, it wasn't your metabolism, it wasn't like, I don't know, Jupiter and Uranus. It was quite clearly you weren't in a deficit, right? Whatever you want to believe. So that's a hard truth. The second hard truth is this: if you've been going to the gym for 5 years, 10 years, 3 years, even 1 year, even 3 months, even 6 months, and if I ask you then, okay, how much do you bench, squat, and deadlift? And you say to me, Faz, thing is, Faz, I'm not a powerlifter. I only kind of bench, squat, and deadlift a plate aside for a few reps. Like, well, you effed up. You effed up. You're not training. You're going to the gym. You're slacking off. So that's the proof in the pudding. Just like with diet, if you've been dieting for 3 to 6 months or whatever, and you're still as big as you are. You made that choice to screw that diet. You're not in a deficit, right? Now, if you go to the gym and you see no strength gains, again, you've made a choice there. Either through lack of knowledge, in which case hire a coach. This is what I literally do for a living, to help people make progress. It's not enough just to turn up at the gym, just like it's not enough just to label yourself with I'm on a diet and wear your I'm on a diet t-shirt. The analogy I always give is it's like taking a class, right? If you take a class and let's say it's a math class, right? Now, at the end of the year, you sit in your math class, you have 100% attendance, you sit in that every time, and then you just stare out the window or whatever you do, okay? So at the end of the year, you fail the math class. And then you're sat there scratching your head going, why did I fail the math class? I turned up for every class. Well, just because you didn't do anything. And it's the same with training. And there's no genetic excuse to say, okay, you know what, I'm still only benching, squatting and deadlifting a plate aside. It's nonsense. You should be actually making progress, because that is the proof you're working hard enough. You can't just say, okay, I'm training like a beast, share beast mode Instagram memes and like high five your buddies and tap them on the arse to say that I'm working hard. You're not, if your managers are not going up. And this is where a good coach comes into play, because they can keep you accountable, give you a system, make sure you keep pushing week in, week out, week in, week out. That is the proof that you're doing it hard enough, because you're getting stronger consistently. I literally have guys on the books who are 50 years old and they're squatting and pulling well over 3 plates a side. I literally have guys on the books who are over 50 years old who started off bench squatting and deadlifting the bar, and within just 4 weeks, they are benching, squatting, and deadlifting a plate aside for sets of 8. Right? That's the level of progress you should be making, tangible progress, and that's the beauty of lifting weights. It's literally all in the numbers, right? You can see your progress or your lack of progress. It's not enough just to turn up at the gym. So hopefully that is useful as a sort of like a head check in terms of where you need to be. And yeah, if you do feel you're at risk, and pretty much all of us are at some point or another, make sure you're doing what you can. Make that choice. Essentially, it's the choice you've got to make. Either train hard, try and do what you can to keep your body in check, or just let it go off to chance, but you know what happens. So do your best. And if you need help with it, hire someone. Links in the description. Anyway, I'm going to call it there. Hopefully you found that interesting, at least looking at some of the studies. I quite like all these things. I read through them quite a lot. I'm going to go and finish off reading the rest of that study, but I will speak to you guys in the next one.